Welcome to PunditViews, where basically I am interviewing everybody from both sideline sports and regular and basically other side too. We're going to have about a couple of big shows in the next few weeks, and we'll talk about more of that later. But right now, we've got ourselves a really special guest here. Now, he is part of the Pundits Pundit. I am part of his show, The Sports Exchange, which is an honor. And the thing is, we work a lot, and he always likes to say, "Great minds think alike." And this one's going to be one of our best. I mean, we've had some great interviews, but this will be one of our best interviews yet. And because this guy's got a lot of stories, so we're just getting started. Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Madmouth.
Well, Jacob, you're building me up. I better live up to those lofty expectations. Glad to do it, really am.
Oh,
I view you as a great teammate all the way around, and every time you can help a fellow teammate out, let alone a guy that GMTA's already got it drilled in the back of his head. I don't think that you have it tattooed on your arm. You don't know me long enough, or they haven't got to the old skull thing yet, but at least it's in your brain and it translates well. So glad to be on. I really enjoy it.
That's awesome. It's like, so you have been a journalist, 42 years now?
43.
43 years. So let's bring this up. Where were you born? Where did this all start?
Well, born in Detroit, obviously, Metro Detroit. And, George Eichhorn, comes on our show a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget the time when my dad went out there and owned a sporting goods store. And he had a guy by the name of Sam Greenblatt. Nobody on our platforms will know him, but at least they'll know him after tonight anyways. He used to be a regular contributor to a regular talk show host called WXYZ Sports Talk. And what was neat about the whole thing was I knew Sam really, really well. And he asked the host of the show, Ron Cameron, if I was able to go out there and be a guest one time. So, not on the show, but watch it as a spectator observer. Ron said, sure, more than happy to do it. Well, then I got to know George Eichhorn, and I liked it. So George Eichhorn didn't last long because, he moved on to something else. And I ended up, after a couple of weeks, becoming the producer of the show. They liked me really a lot. I'm a real big researcher, even if you had the Associated Press, UPI, and any wire service imaginable to mankind back in the dinosaur age. I subsequently went on and took over the producer's role. And, sports media has done a lot for me. It's been a part of my life for 43 years. I've covered four Super Bowls in person, 3 virtually, and I've had a chance to cover all major sports, including auto racing, baseball, basketball, hockey, football, you name it, college football. And I've made a lot of connections over the years, both inside of Michigan as well as nationally, Southern Florida, and wherever my trails have gone. So, Jacob, when it's in your blood, it's in your blood. And as much as you want it to, you can leave it. You're not leaving it because it's just what it is. It's a part of you. And that's what keeps my fire burning now that I'm 60 years old and will go as long as I can. And I remember back in 1984, I won an award for the Tampa Tribune for the best sports reporter in the state of Florida. I'm thinking, I don't think I'm that good, but I guess other people did. So I'll be more than happy to take away the award and talk about it, even though I don't mention it a lot because I don't really like to pat myself on the back. I'm one of those kinds of people. Let my work do my talking for me.
And here's the thing. I was going to ask this. It's like you brought up George Eichhorn. Now, what would you say the stories are that how you met him besides what you just said right now? So you said he didn't last long, but how did you guys meet?
Well, we met. He was the actual producer for WXYZ Sports Talk.
Okay.
Well, he brought me in, and I'll never forget. And this is a lesson everybody should learn. Okay, I'm back in high school when all this transpired. And I'll never forget the time, and I even remember the instructor's name. Her name was Miss Ann Nozeski, and I was in a creative writing 2 class. Now she's telling everybody, I want everybody to do everything I can to get something published. Come on, Jacob, you're talking to high school people, for crying out loud. What are the odds of that happening? Well, little did that woman know that I'm working for ABC Radio as a producer, or, at that time, before I took over for George as an intern. And he wrote for the Detroit Monitor. And I wrote a controversial story on don't boycott the 1980 Olympics. The woman graded me down from an A to an A minus because she didn't agree with me. She
So
didn't.
it's not just now. So it's not just now. It's back then too.
Oh, don't worry. It gets better than this. First of all, Eichhorn, let me backtrack a little. He asked a bunch of us people, interns at the time, to write a few paragraphs because all the Detroit teams were awful. And, and Eichhorn said, I'll have it up next week. Oh, okay. Whatever you say, dude. I don't even know the guy, right?
Right.
A week later, I come to the station and he published it. Really?
Well, that's awesome. He's your first.
Oh, well, here's the moral of the story, though. It gets better.
Mm-hmm.
He was a man of his word. And when he did that, then I said, all right, let's get this Olympics one done. So I walked in there. He didn't agree with it either. I said, I don't care if you agree, get the stupid thing published. So, okay, I'll do it. A week later, comes back in the Monitor. I took this very article when I went to Lakeland High School in Michigan, Jacob, and I showed this Miss Noseski, and I slammed this thing right on her desk where everybody could hear it. Here, Miss Noseski, I got it published. Take that. Boy, that woman and I got along really well after that point. She dealt with a 17-year-old kid with a little bit of charisma, but that's how our friendship built as we continue to build both at WXYZ, ABC, as well as the numerous outlets that we've had throughout the better part of 43 years. So
I didn't realize that George Eichhorn was that much older.
He isn't that much older than me. He's only like 6-7 years older.
Oh, okay.
So he's not that much older. In fact, you saw on last Wednesday's edition of the Sports Exchange that we were both at the Chuck Hughes death, even though I didn't know him at the time.
Right.
And then we subsequently ended up talking about, no, he's like 6-7 years older than me. He's not that much older than I am.
Oh, so he started young.
Yeah, well, a lot of us start young.
Yeah,
we do. I mean, if it's in your blood, it's in your blood. And I've done work all over the country. I did some stuff in San Francisco. I've written in Cincinnati, and the beat goes on. And to me, and now I have my own deal with the South Florida Tribune, but I worked for the Detroit Monitor for the better part of 40 years, and that was my connection to make all of my connections.
And I remember interning at Fox 61 Chattanooga before it got sold out, basically. Right. And it's like that was my one place that I actually interned a couple months. And the one thing I can remember is I did all right with certain things, but then I got to run the – I remember one night I'd been burning the candle at both ends, and then they had me run the teleprompter, and I fell asleep during it. So the screen goes, and I'm like, oh, and it's like, and so they just all stumbled. It was during a live newscast. So the thing is, truthfully, it was sold soon after that, but I think I would have been done anyway.
Well, amazingly enough, how you bring up the TV part, a lot of my stuff has mainly been done in newspaper, radio, but I did have a chance to intern for a period of time behind the scenes for a local sportscast here in South Florida. It was Channel 7. I believe they were the NBC affiliate at the time. And one of my early mentors was named as Andy Lascano, and we talked and taught me the values of working hard and being different. And it would behoove for me to ever go on a show and say that my writing mentor is Tony DeMarco. And he once went out there and told me the best way to learn is by reading other people's. Gave me a sporting news, and I would read a lot of the bigger writers then, and Tony would correct me. And he worked at Miami Herald today. Tony and I are as close as we've always been, and I'm due to make a call sooner or later. But every time I get to Phoenix, I go out there and catch up with Tony. He's a guy I credit a lot of my early development to. George has been there throughout, and Andy Lascano, I haven't talked 20, 30 years, but he taught me a lot in terms of hard work and being able to go out there and be different. And I'll tell you, you put those combination of things together, Jacob, that's a very potent combination of values that you really, really need in an effort to go out there and formulate a foundation of how you want to get things accomplished.
Oh, definitely. And so what's the next thing I was going to say is, like, did you go to school for journalism? Where did you go?
I'll never forget. Well, I took 12 credits, Oakland Community College. I didn't really care for the high school I went to, but I knew that I had a senior option program that was available. So if I wanted to avoid out-of-state fees, this was a way to do it. Get 12 in my pocket, they're automatically going to transfer. And moved to Southern Florida, took a semester off, acclimate myself to the area, enrolled at a place called Broward Community College and got an associate's in journalism there. And then from there, I took 6 credit hours at FIU. Didn't really to test it out. Didn't like that campus, but 6 credits nonetheless. And then I got my bachelor's of degree in communication at University of South Florida in 1986. So, and I paid my way through college. So that was something that meant a lot to me. And I did so by being able to work at good publications like the Hallandale Digest, where I met a lot of famous people. If you look at my Facebook page, you'll find that a lot of them are there, Instagram or whatnot. I don't put a lot of those on Twitter, but Facebook and Instagram is where a lot of the famous people like the Tom Lasordas, Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Leonards, and the list goes on and on. So, the Hallandale Digest was a very influential place my first couple years down in Florida. Then I moved over to the Tampa Tribune, where I have a lot of good friends I'm still in touch with from time to time, and it's really neat. So, I think the biggest thing, Jacob, it's all the people you meet along the trail.
So here's this question. You are a born and bred, diehard Detroit guy. This gets Detroit forever. What was your thought process to go to Florida?
God, needed something different, tired of the cold weather, and for me, Detroit was a major sports town, and I needed to go to a different market and find a way to make some new connections is what I needed. And I thought that this was an opportunity for me to go on my own. The Digest was great, especially at the beginning. And then I transferred to Tampa. So, young guy, warm weather, new opportunity, meet new people. At that time, though, when I moved to Florida, you didn't have the National Hockey League. You didn't have Major League Baseball. You didn't have the NBA. All you had was the Miami Dolphins, the Fort Lauderdale Strikers, and the Miami Hurricanes. So in retrospect, Jacob, we were really a small market, but that was good for me because that allowed me to go out there and make the most of a much smaller area. So do I want to say it was untapped territory? Maybe not, maybe undeveloped, but now you got all 4 of the major teams. You still had, don't get me wrong, you still had spring training down here. And I had enough connections where if there was something big going on, I'd find a way to get to it by hook or by crook. Right. And I'll never forget the time I'm working for the Hallandale Digest. And my boss, and his name is Dan Blueston, said, by the way, just letting you know, George Steinbrenner was over at the Fort Lauderdale Yankees game. So I decided to mess with Danny's head a little. Said, really? Tell me all about it. So he is, and by the way, Danny, I got him on tape, and he's going to be written for the Digest. And the guy says, really? I just wanted to see how far you were going to go with it until I tipped my hand. But I had a really big passion for his dad, Peter Blueston, who to me is one of those people you meet in life, was like a father figure to you, treated me like his own son. And again, there's a lot of people I can talk about, but I loved it. Every time Danny would question me on certain things, like I'll never forget a story when I was covering the Dolphins during training camp. And a guy by the name of Al Del Greco was a kicker. And Danny said, why would you want to even do anything about a kicker? And I'll tell you why, Danny, because I have a hunch. And everybody in their right mind, if you're a journalist growing up, if you have a hunch or an instinct, you got to roll with it. And mind you, I'm a young guy working with Don Shula. Ever heard of him? The greatest head coach of all time.
Yeah.
And Don taught me a lot of interesting lessons, too, as a kid. And I'll get into that another time because I know I'm going to get bombarding the audience with a lot of stories anyways. But I ended up writing on Del Greco, and Danny leaned on me for doing it. So the Dolphins let him go, and he got picked up by the Houston Oilers. And I said, all right, Danny, when will you ever get it figured out to stop questioning my instincts? Although I'm not convinced you ever will. Okay. Got me on that one. And I got him on a lot of other ones too. And it wasn't about a Scott versus Danny thing. I'm learning around good professional people in the industry. And when you're aggressive and you're out there, then it's important. When I told you before we went on the air that if I get another NFL opportunity on Sunday, I'll, come on Basketballs a week later because I got bribed with the live stuff here on site so that I can maximize our YouTube channel and our network with Sideline and South Florida Tribune. We'll always make our shows, but let me tell you, if an opportunity comes along to be somewhere, like one of my favorite people through the years is not only Tom Lasorda, but Don Mattingly recently has been great. I worked with Sparky Anderson. I covered the New York Yankees back in the 80s during spring training. So, and the list goes on and on. And But moral of the story, follow your instincts. You have good suggestions, you put them out there. One of two things are going to happen. Either going to turn out the way you want to, or it's a lesson learned. Although if I make a move on a decision, I won't do it unless I'm 100% instinctually on board with it. If there's anything that I have any doubts about it, I won't do it. But those are very rare.
And what's up tonight, Will? How you doing? Hey, no, appreciate that, Will. Appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Appreciate you, pal.
And if you brought it up, as you said, great minds think alike. And it's like, that's where I actually moved to Atlanta. I went to Lee University in Tennessee. And we were talking about what do we do after school. And there was a thought about Knoxville and everything. Mm-hmm. Well, my brother was here in Atlanta. And it wasn't what I was thinking about for the moment. But I wanted to act still. I had just gotten into acting a little for the first year, doing like murder mystery thing in Chattanooga. So I did a little thing in there. So I decided, Atlanta is not going to be New York and LA, and I'm not going to get crushed like I would over there. So Atlanta at the time was becoming a big independent view. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I did the same thing, be able to come out of that. And then a lot of parts of the story came about. I didn't get big when it got big. You know what I'm saying? But I kind of learned a lot along the way, kind of grew up that way and earned these gray hairs that way. So, and it's like now I'm helping with a movie again. So things are going well. But you know something? You bring this up and you brought up Aldo Greco. That he was also, I believe he was a Green Bay Packer also, wasn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, he was. I mean, he did a lot with Houston Oilers, but then with the Green Bay Packers as well. Aldo Greco was a nice guy. In fact, I used to pick on Andy Lascano because he was down here. And one of my best friends, Mark Wilson, was out in Las Vegas. Now, hopefully you'll meet him when we get to Vegas a year from now.
Sure.
But he was the guy that I've known for a lot of years. But Andy, I would run up to Andy. TV guys know who the good interviews are. I'd call Andy up at the station or so, who should I go after next? And he'd give me a lot of it. I'd just check him off one box after another. And, it's a shame. Although I have a lot of interviews on cassette, maybe one of these days I'll consider doing a channel or at least a show about some of my greatest interviews. But I'll have to make sure I update the technology again. And there would never be audio, of course. Visual by now. But you never know. I mean, the world nowadays – it's changed to a point where creativity is at an all-time high. You got millions and millions of people doing these podcast things. And recently, when I just reached the show with a guy by the name of Larry Bluestein, who I met through Danny, who happens to be a cousin, and he said, he tells me, well, we just did a recent show on Fire Up Florida. We got to roll with the times.
All right.
And they do. So I embrace podcasting, although I don't view my shows as podcasts. I do them broadcasts because I'm just too old school to think any other way. That's not trying to make one term better than the other. It's just when you're so used to doing it for so long, that's what you become accustomed to doing. But you have to adjust with the time. And I've been lucky enough through my work in the media, to have met a lot of unbelievable, influential people. One of my favorite stories, though, I think I mentioned it to you guys on Basket Bros, was Larry Bird. I'm covering the Detroit.
I was going to bring that question up. I wanted to but let's go to it with the next question.
Go ahead.
Go to the next question. So what brought you back? To Detroit? Like you said, you worked for Detroit and we covered the Pistons and you have those stories and you covered all that. So tell me how you got back over there.
Fulfilled my objective to get a degree in Florida. Very happy to do it. And then I actually spent a year in baseball in 1987, although there was a 3 or 4 month stop in Detroit to regroup a little bit. I hung out at my parents' place, and then I took on a job as a director of public relations for the Gastonia Rangers, at the time the Class A affiliate of Texas Rangers. So I was a member of the Texas Ranger organization for a year. I had the opportunity to work with Sammy Sosa, Juan Gonzalez, and we lost over 90 some odd games, and we had 10 to 12 guys make it to the big league. So, but then from there, after I left North Carolina, I went back to Detroit. I've always stayed with the Monitor anyways, because I could do stories wherever I wanted to. George Eichmann would make sure that he sent a credential request out. Boom, they get approved, and I do what I got to do and make sure I send everything to them. Nowadays, it's a lot easier. But I'm going to get to the Bird story, but let me backtrack on one thing, and I will not lose sight of it. When I was working for the Tampa Tribune, I had the opportunity, and as well as the Digest, of covering the Florida State League All-Star game. I'll never forget the story when I'm trying to transmit my story with one of those computers where you have the headset inside that thing and you have to send it. And it was a nightmare. It's a brand new stadium, Osceola County Stadium. Took me 5 attempts, couldn't do it. Contacted my editor, Rick Nelson. I can't get this to you. We got to do. And so, what can I do? I've worked too hard all day. Don't worry, Scott. Appreciate you being calm. I'll get an extension of the deadline. We've got about a half an hour, 45 minutes leeway. And Rick dictated the whole. I had 2 stories over the phone. It took us 20, 25 minutes. We got them up. No problem. So you talk about lessons in terms of how far technology is. That was one piece of adversity that I learned to deal with as I continued to get used to the electronics even back then when you had typewriters and computers then. Now, back to the Larry Bird story. I covered the Pistons for a lot of years. I had a season credential, and I was staying on the floor a lot. And I would go to the draft for the Pistons to cover the Lions. Did a little bit of Red Wings stuff, a little bit of Tigers. I've done more Tigers and Red Wings more remotely every so while since I left town, although now when I go to the Red Wings in person, that's great. So, but anyways, George Eichhorn kind of had a little deal. You cover a lot of the Detroit teams in Wayne County, and I'll focus on the suburbs because he lives in Warren. No problem. I did stuff with the Wings, don't get me wrong. I did stuff with the Tigers downtown, don't get me wrong, but it was periodic, not regular. So I'm covering the Pistons and the Detroit Lions, okay? I got the Pontiac Silverdome and the Palace of Auburn Hills in Oakland County. Well, I'm covering a Pacers game, okay? And I decided Larry Bird was the coach of the Pacers at the time. I waited for him to talk to all of us afterwards. And then I pulled him aside. I asked Coach Bird, because Jacob, how you address somebody to me is how well you can expect to be treated with respect.
Yeah.
And I addressed Larry Bird, Coach Bird. I said, listen, Coach Bird, I know you weren't arguably one of the greater athletes out there, but what made you a lot better than a lot of the players that you faced? Very nice and polite about it. Again, he said, Scott, all I did is three steps ahead of everybody. That's it. Up here between the years. And you know what? Don Shula taught me many years ago that he never used to go ahead and get players to do what they couldn't do. It was about living off people's strengths. And Larry Bird's lesson to me was outthink everybody and you'll never lose.
Well, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And trust me, those 2 things have really helped me become wiser, smarter as time goes on and situations arise.
Well, I got Bird for 84 to 92 when he retired. So I was 6 years old when I was a Bird fan. And to trust me, and people would laugh at it all sometimes, or even I can't believe it, I was absorbing it from the get-go. So I was watching immediately. I not only did I watch the game and absorb how it goes, but I knew the stats. I knew everything. But from that time around, and it was ridiculous. It was kind of ridiculous at my age. But I watched it from 84 to 92, but I got literally 3 years of him that he didn't have a blown out back. It's like after that thing. So 88 to 92, this is the funny thing. 88 to 92 are his most painful years, but the 88 he gets to 30 points a game. You know what I'm saying? That kind of deal. But those are actually my favorite clips to go back to when I want to watch something are those years, because you're seeing a guy that cannot move anymore. He cannot move a lick, and he's getting 40. He's getting triple-double. He's getting 15 rebounds, and he can't move an inch. And he can't do the drives anymore. He can't do the same dunks anymore like he used or any of that. He never was a big dunker, but you get my point. He couldn't do any of that, and yet he's doing literally off the ball, and he's just destroying every big-time perimeter defender you ever got. And those are the big things. So you right what you brought up. He said he always outthought you.
That's what it's all about. Sometimes it isn't the physical abilities that you have. It's the mental things you do to outsmart your opponent. Remember one thing, okay, Jacob, I hope everybody that's watching this show as well. Life is a chess game, not checkers. If you don't figure out how to play chess in this lifetime, you are in trouble. That's all I can tell you. And for me to be able to go out there and have lunch or dinner with a lot of people, I worked with Chuck Daly before. And I think what I really enjoy about basketball is it gives me an opportunity to go back in time and reminisce about those days where I was covering the Pistons. And I've had a good working relationship in South Florida when I was involved with the NBA more often with the Miami Heat. They've always treated me really good. But I think nowadays I have tuned basketball out. mainly because of the drama in today's game, in as much as it had when I was covering it on a regular basis. And I can tell you, some of the writers that I got to know with the Pistons group always taught me a little something. And, it's all mental. And Larry Bird knew it. I mean, think about it. Him and Magic Johnson took a league that was on tape delay,
Mm-hmm.
and now they turn it into real time, prime time viewing. And I think today's players don't even understand the state of the league before compared to where it's at now. And I know we can get into this another time, but I think the thing you learn though when you're covering sports inside a locker room is you learn who your friends are in the locker room.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that, Dennis Rodman was a good friend that I knew I could turn to in the locker room. I don't care about the tattoos and all the other business. That stuff came about when Chuck Daly was no longer the coach of the Pistons. Dennis Rodman was a straight shooter when Chuck Daly was his father figure there. So any of this stuff that this guy's crazy, no, he's intelligent. Dennis is just okay in my book. But, you learn who your friends are. James Edwards is another one of my friends in the locker room. Joe Dumars, and the list goes on and on. I say, hey, James, anything you want. Got to tell you a funny story about Dennis Rodman and I at the Boston Garden, though.
Yeah.
At that time, I had a torn ankle because I went skiing on Christmas Day and got injured the same day that Billy Martin got killed on my last run of the day. Well, that's how I always remember when I got the accident.
1989?
Yeah, that's what it is. That's fine. I can tell you when I had my back surgery when Michael Jackson and Farrah Fawcett died, too. But those are some of the things here. Word association, of course, doesn't hurt to have Google either. But that helps me over at the doctor's office when I have to fill out 9 gallons of paperwork. But I'll never forget. I'm at the Boston Garden, and I wasn't sitting on the floor. And Bill Laimbeer makes this wise comment to me because Bill and I didn't like each other. I mean, then again, one of the major reasons he never got an NBA head coaching job is he ruffled a lot of feathers. I know that he does too. If he had to treat the media differently, he probably should have done it knowing what could have happened down the road. The ladies' game is better suited for him anyhow. So anyways, I'm talking to Dennis in the locker room over at the Boston Garden, and I saw the Pistons play the Celtics, and then I stayed around for another game when the Celtics were nice enough to credential me for the San Antonio Spurs and them. And that was the first time David Robinson ever stepped foot. It was his rookie year. So Bill Laimbeer made some wise comments. Listen, Bill, okay, just because you can afford your stupid car payment doesn't mean I can. And now the Pistons are listening where this is going to go, because they didn't know something was going to happen at the time. And Dennis said, Bill, get away from here. Don't look to cause any trouble. This is my friend, and I'm going to help him any way I can. Beat it, Bill. What do you think Bill Laimbeer does? Moves to a different part of the locker room, tape recorder going. Dennis Rodman and I are talking, no big deal. But you got to know your friends in certain places. And if you do, they'll bend over backwards to help you out as long as you treat them with the proper amount of respect.
Now, you bring up Bill Laimbeer here, and it's like I'm going to ask a 2-part question on this thing. First off, like over the time you took, you probably had the Pistons when they were really, really bad until when they went really good. So what was the difference between covering that and covering those years and covering their big years? What was the difference with those? Second of all, knowing that you knew the people in the locker room, knowing the Pistons, and you've been up close and personal, in your opinion, what was Laimbeer's problem? Why was he such a jerk where he couldn't get a coaching job in the league, where he treated the press horribly, where he was just a jerk to everybody? What was his? I know he was a rich kid and he went to Notre Dame, but what do you think? There are rich kids that are nice people. What was his issue?
Well, did it ever dawn on you that a lot of the guys he played against, got jobs with teams in their front office?
Right. You talking about Carson?
He didn't make any friends there, did he?
No.
If you're going to go out there and shove somebody to the ground and trash talk them, they hold grudges too a little bit depending on who you are.
Right.
Okay? So they do. So he really, to me, what Bill Laimbeer did is he got on people's nerves and they held a grudge.
But what was the reasoning? Was he just a natural jerk, or is it just because I know he was a good rebounder. I know he could shoot from 16, 18 feet, whatever. I knew he had some good play, but it's like by itself, normally you're a jerk when you can't play, but he could play.
It's okay. Did you ever know that his dad made more money than he did?
Yeah, absolutely. He's a
Okay,
rich.
well, there you go. So number one, but no, I mean, don't get me wrong. Bill Lambier, the only job he ever got in the NBA was working with Kurt Rambis, of all people, of the Lakers, and they battled each other in the NBA Finals too.
Right.
And the Timberwolves were awful. Now, what was good when they were good? Well, number one, the crowds were a lot smaller. So when you're bad, you're not playing in front of as many people, are you, Jacob? So
Right.
so therefore, if you have smaller crowds, these players are listening to what you're saying, and whether they like it or not. And I was never at the Malice at the Palace. I was never there. I was on the road after that.
Right.
But they hear what's going on around them. They read about what we do, and I've always tried to be respectful, but I also have a responsibility, a job to do. Bill Lambier, if you were to ask him today if he would have treated the media better, he probably would tell you, yeah, just like Barry Bonds. I mean, what's kept him out of the Hall of Fame? Well, you know what? He had 10 years on the writer's ballot, right? But nobody got in. Obviously, they frown upon steroids, but don't bite the hand that feeds you towards immortality.
Right.
And in this particular case, Bill Lambier ruffled a lot of guys that would be future executives in the league. I'll give you another one. Danny Ainge wouldn't hire him. And what do you think would happen when Isaiah Thomas was a coach for the Pacers and Larry Bird took over? What was the first line of business? Bird told him, stay on your vacation, subsequently fired Thomas.
Yeah.
He did. Who'd he bring in? Rick Carlisle. So, so think about it. Players have a fraternity here, okay? And we can handle the winning and the losing. But, all this trash talking and that goes back and forth at some point can bite you in some way, shape, or form, and as a result, but no, I always thought that Bill Lambier was one of those types of players that made a lot out of virtually no ability. He was a rebounder. He's a strong presence in the locker room, which is good. When Mark Aguirre was traded to the Pistons for Adrian Dantley, Bill Lambier, Isaiah Thomas, and the rest of that core group brought in Aguirre's. I don't know what your track record was here, but you're not going to fracture this locker room. And they gave him a heart-to-heart talk that you can hear from Key West all the way to Anchorage. I mean, and they weren't going to let him go out there and be disruptive like he might have been somewhere else. So it's just one of those kinds of things where, hey, you know what? Bill Lambier will never get in the Hall of Fame. Dennis Rodman did, meanwhile, because he was one of those players who was a great defensive player, won 5 championships. When he left teams, they were worse off when he left than they were when he went there, with the exception of the Lakers, where that timing wasn't very good. Phil Jackson didn't get there as quick as he could have hoped for. But now Bill Lambier was just, like you say, a jerk. And your behavior sometimes when you're networking can either make or break you. And I think that's what happened. Isaiah,
go ahead. Now, this thing, and then we'll get to a 3-question deal before we go.
Sure.
What did you like covering better, as far as the Pistons, the Silverdome or the Palace?
I only covered the Silverdome for about 1 year, and that was just later as I returned home from North Carolina. So I happened to catch the Lakers and the Pistons, during when they went to the finals but lost in 7. So you could say that I was more or less, I have to be partial toward the Pistons. It was the Palace because it was a NBA type arena is what it was. Where the Silverdome, let me tell you, I don't recognize Ford Field as my football stadium. I've always recognized the Silverdome because that's where I spent a lot of my time there. So I would say the Palace when it came to the Pistons, because I only had a short sample size of the Silverdome. But when it came to the Silverdome and the Lions, on the other hand, well, the Silverdome's in my blood. Even to this day, Stephen A. Smith still thinks the Lions play at the Silverdome. And you don't even know if they play at Ford Field, but I'm not getting into that. But that just shows you venues that are synonymous with what Detroiters are, particularly people in the media as well.
Well, and the thing is, the biggest thing about it is, I think about is how in the world did the Pistons get the Silverdome, by the way, in those years? How did they get that in the first place? That's a 62,000 seat place.
Yeah, well, first of all, they played at downtown Cobo Arena. The building held about 10, 12,000. They weren't drawing very well anyhow. A lot of people thought the Pistons fan base would be better suited to the suburbs. So they ended up moving out to Pontiac. And I think it was a pretty good move for them. It really was. And they could have stayed there longer. Problem with the Silverdome was it was built back in the 70s, and the roof used to blow up open, and then they used to have problems, and they'd have to play at Joe Louis Arena, and they were out of whack and played at Cobo. So they went from Cobo Arena to the Silverdome, and then the Silverdome to the Palace of Auburn Hills, and now they've gone from the Palace down to Little Caesars Arena. Is what they did. But a lot of people thought the Pistons were more of a suburb type team, and now they ended up bringing them back to downtown Detroit, where they're sharing a building with the Red Wings.
All right, I got 3 questions before we get going because I know you got your coming up.
I'm not worried about whatever.
Yeah, but we got this here. I got a 3-question deal I always give to all the people I interview. Number 1, you wake up in the morning, you have your own team. You pick a team of your own thing. It could be baseball, basketball, football, anything like that. You're now owner of a team. You choose. What is your biggest improvements?
You talking all the time in Detroit?
It doesn't matter. You can pick one of now, or I'm just saying of now, the one that you're the owner of. What would you do? What are your biggest things you do?
Well, geez, that's not fair to anybody else you bring on afterwards, because we have a great thing in Detroit. I mean, Ty Cobb.
It could be the Tigers or whatever. I'm just saying.
I'll give you a combination of all the sports, for crying out loud. Barry Sanders is great. How many am I allowed to put on the list?
It doesn't matter. I'm just saying you own the team. Like of now, this is a now. You own the team. What would you?
All right, give me Barry Sanders. Give me Isaiah Thomas. Give me Gordie Howe, to name 3. And let's see, Al Kaline. I put Mickey Lowell. You need a great pitcher on there. I wasn't alive in the 40s or 50s to know how a lot of those guys are doing. But Barry Sanders will always be on my team. One thing I loved about Barry Sanders working with him is he was a low-key individual that always said nobody's bigger than the moment. Just act like you've been there before and keep moving on. So, if I were going to look nationally, I'm certainly going to put Larry Bird and Magic Johnson on that team. Larry Bird, to me, I just marvel at the guy, the way he can outthink anybody.
I like what way you did brought that question. I like how you measured it because you went to a time machine. A lot of people are just doing the now and what they would get. And there's going to be a lot there, but you went through a time machine and chose your players. I kind of like that.
Well, 43 years, you're bound to have one, aren't you, Jacob?
Yep.
I mean, Isaiah Thomas and I got along extremely well. Joe Dumars was a big part of the Pistons. Gordie Howe was an Iron Man. Alex Delvecchio, nobody on this show would know who he is. Mickey Redmond. The Red Wings have such an incredible history where they won 11 Stanley Cups. And here's a team that could get on national TV, and there's other teams that can't do it because of their history. And the Pistons, I mean, think about it. The Lions haven't had a championship since December 29th, 1957. Mm-hmm. Why do I know that? Because I was born on December 29th, but it was 62. So when you talk about word association, date association, I can honestly say that, well, okay, my birthday means something, even if it was premature. So it's just one of those kind of deals where, you measure individuals over time. And again, one of my favorite athletes I'd always mention that nobody probably knows, I love Bo Jackson. And yet he never played in my market. But why? Because Bo Jackson is the type of guy who was an even keel, level-headed guy that could play 2 sports well and do a lot. So I don't mind bringing up others, and I don't mind you if I had more time to answer that question. Who knows what other name? But I love Mickey Lolich of the Detroit Tigers. I had him on one of my shows, and he was great. And to me, here's a guy that outdueled Bob Gibson in Game 7 of the '68 World Series, won 3 games in a series where the Detroit Tigers were heavy underdogs. And what do you expect? But Tigers went on to win and snap a long drought. So you have to encompass over time because not, whether they're millennials or people that are historians or whatnot, what can I say?
Number 2, I'm going to ask this thing too. You get to control journalism. All of journalism for yourself, considering you work in it. You get to control it. I did a couple of times with a couple of my guests, like politics, but they didn't want to say the answer. So I'm gonna frame a question differently. Okay, you're down with journalism. You get to control it. You get to improve it. Where do you start?
Well, one thing I would do is I'd make sure that a lot of people involved better know Google by heart, because to me, missing a fact is as bad as a factual error.
So So, do you think the biggest? Okay, that's another thing to ask. Do you think a lot of journalists actually lie, or do you think they just don't get the facts and they rush it through?
Combination of both. Everybody's looking for the clicks. Mario Cristobal had a great line when I was I'm covering the Canes now going forward, and I did in 22. Mario Cristobal answers you straight. He don't care about how many clicks you get. So
Yeah.
a lot of people are looking to worry about clicks rather than understand the magnitude of just get it right. And I think the one thing I'm trying to develop here at the Trib is not only have a sports organization, but non-sports. And some of my favorite people through the years were Frank Reynolds when he went out there during the Reagan assassination and blew a gasket on the air. I'm not worried about getting it on first. I want it right. And he ripped everybody in sight behind the scenes and on camera that this is how it's going to be done. Now, if you've ever been to Arlington Cemetery, I visited his grave there and said, thank you very much, for doing that, because that's how you build a lot of your core values. So I think that's a great question. A combination. I wish people would take more time to get it right. We'll still worry about clicks.
So,
I care less about fake news, because once you have fake news, then you lose credibility.
Bring up Frank Reynolds. Tell our viewers who Frank Reynolds is and where he
was a prominent newscaster for ABC and did Nightline. And to me, I look at him iconically like a Walter Cronkite. Yeah, I know you don't care for Dan Rather. I don't care. But they're prominent on the air. David Brinkley. And a lot of the old newscasters that, to me, told it to you straight and made sure that it was as accurate as could be. Peter Jennings is another guy I liked over the years. A lot of people don't know that I have a really big desire where I like news and different subjects outside of my comfort zone with sports. And that'll be one of my primary goals in 23, is to be able to go out there and do more of those kinds of things like one-on-ones, which we're going to do on No Limits as the year goes on. Sure. But Frank Reynolds is one of those guys, an old school military guy, got into the media. And when you look at the history of newscasters in the United States, between Reynolds, Harry Reasoner, Walter Cronkite, Peter Jennings, Barbara Walters, who we had recently, sure, female or no, and these people were exemplified so much class, it was ridiculous. And the way not only did they get the journalism, but the way they presented it. So they weren't afraid to let it loose.
Was that normal when he said, I want it right? Did he have a pretty big temper?
You bet. You bet he did. But you know what? That was the best part about him. He was, Jacob, people have to make it real. I guess I don't get into a lot of songs, but the Jets had a song called Make It Real. And although I don't think that was connected to Frank Reynolds by any stretch, make it real. Every good journalist, should have a temper or a fiery side, because you're ultra competitive about getting it right and make sure that, I've always had a philosophy is not only are we entertainers, but you want to educate and inform. If we miss out on any of those, we haven't done what we need to.
Well, one of the things that reminds me of, and I'll get to the third question in a second.
Sure.
One of the things that reminds me of is the Washington Post 2 times in the last 3 weeks they had a story, basically a hit story on a guy named Christopher Rufo, who is now he's basically on an education board in Florida. He's a conservative, all that kind of stuff. Twice they did these big hit pieces. He caught a bunch of lies and they had to retract. Twice, a bunch of retractions, about 4 or 5 each. Okay. That's why I ask you with this is like, how does this get past editors?
You know what? Editors are so busy sometimes that they don't have a chance to be able to research everything. And you have to hope and pray that the people that they have on staff are doing it right. It does. Anything can get past an editor. We're only 2 legs and 2 arms, only so many eyes and a brain. And the volume that gets run from, there's always oversights. That can happen.
Okay. And third thing, I'll ask you this, but we're going to stick with journalism. I'll ask this for this third question. Can we ever in our lifetime get past activism journalism like these trying to do? They might lie about it, might lie about something to get their story, to make it rushed, or are we going to be able to get past that? This is a phase in life.
No, unfortunately, I hate to answer this question the way I'm going to have to answer it. I don't think you ever get away from it, because there's going to be certain people out there. They're going to do it a certain way. Then you're going to have editors, whether it's news or sports or whatever the case may be. They're going to let it go anyways, because at that point they're worried about selling ad sponsors and getting eyes on these shows. I'd like to sit here and think that old-fashioned ethics exist, but I don't. I really don't. And now you'll have a lot of the people out there that will get it right because they know they were brought up to do it that way and they have morals and standards. But then the other side aren't going to care and people are going to get by. That's just unfortunate. And it's really a shame. I'm not going to tell you I'm the greatest thing on the planet. I just want to do the best I can and get it right. And if people see that you're accustomed to doing things a certain way, you'll gain credibility. But there's other people in life. You can't take shortcuts and expect to make it in this business, Jacob. If you think you can, shame, shame, shame. And I think one of the things that really annoyed me a lot last week during ESPN's coverage of the Buffalo Bills player, Hamel,
Hamlin.
Hamlin, is I have no problem praying for a guy like that. I don't. But don't lose sight of Chuck Hughes being the only one that ever died on the field. And you only have like Mike Wilbon and Tony Kornheiser who go to the old school version of journalism that represent what I stand for, what you stand for. But everybody on that particular network went out there and either said it's never happened before or didn't do enough to research. Because that to me is a bunch of baloney. It really is. So you've got to make sure you get familiar with Google and hope and pray that if you're going to trust somebody to deliver your news and entertainment, that you go out there with the intent, okay, to get it right. There's no shortcuts in this business, Jacob. I don't care what anybody says. If they think they are, more power to them. If I catch anybody trying to use a shortcut with me, or they go against what I tell them to do in pre-production, they were warned, and they were warned, I don't invite them back. Yeah. There's too many people out there, to me, I can bring on. I don't want to mention any names, but I've had a couple like that went against what I initially, because we only have so much time to deliver the message. And if it goes 30 minutes over than what the original projection time was, knowing that time's attention spans, to me, are a lot more compromised. Okay, glad you came out once. See ya. Well, can I come back? I'll let you know. Try to be nice about it. But don't go against certain things that go against morals or principles when you've been either told in advance. But to me, it's all about getting it right. And that's what I loved about Frank Reynolds. I hope I could take my wife over to Arlington Cemetery. Thank God we have YouTube these days where you can listen to these voices. You ever go ahead and YouTube the way Frank Reynolds handled things with the Reagan assassination? To me, nothing short of brilliant. But I've always loved good, strong, hard journalists that focus on fact and aren't afraid to speak their mind and show that they're human. That's what's important.
Well, Scott, with that said, you've got a show, and really quickly, advertise what your show is for tonight and for our viewers.
All right. Well, tonight we're going to be doing Fire Up Michigan. Talk about the Detroit Lions getting the Rodney Dangerfield treatment that they don't get any respect. So, feel free to join us, South Florida Tribune YouTube channel. Show will start about 8:15, 8:20 Eastern time. And of course, you see my information on Twitter at Tribune South, and just feel free to go to the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel. I would appreciate the opportunity if y'all folks would go out there and subscribe to us so you can get all the shows that we have, as well as the ones that you participate on as well, Jacob. So it's been a lot of fun being able to talk about something about my background, instead of the guy there. I think it's important that people have to understand you do focus on your passion, but don't be afraid to branch out a little too and challenge and test yourself. And I think that one of the things I've noticed about you in the time I've worked with is you do that. And, I have a lot of great people I like working with Sideline. I make no bones about it. You're definitely one of my favorites, and not because I'm on your show, but I know if I feel there's a connection here, Jacob, and there aren't many people who would come on a show on short notice except you. And I just want people to know that you're first class in every sense of the word. And I'm so glad that you're my teammate.
Very, very appreciated. And it's and that's the biggest deal, I think, and yin and yang. And someday I'll let you know about it. I'll send you a show sometime. You can watch that. That's non-sports, but then I think you'll enjoy it. Anyway, I'm Jacob Christner. That's Scott Morganroth. This is Pundit Views. I hope you enjoyed the interview for the night. And we'll tell you for next week, but 2 weeks from now, we have Andrew Petcash from not Politico. I'm sorry, Andrew Petcash from Sportico, and he's a business sports writer, and it's going to be a wonderful interview. So anyway, for Jake, that's Scott. Have a great night.
Thank you. Okay. Want to get us set up? Please.
can exit that.
Huh?
You can exit that show.